speaker is Jorge Flores. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I just want to welcome the new members. Welcome back to the old members. Excuse me. Well, you know why I'm here. You know the problem that we're going through. I don't want to repeat myself. I just want to give you a little bit more of the picture of what all the small business are going through, and just to let you know, how hard we have it now. One of the things that we're going through is the increase on cost of goods sold. All the goods, everything is sky high. So it's one of the things. The other thing that we had to deal with is the increase in wages, which I understand if everything is really, really expensive, our employees need more money to pay for that. All the homeless that comes into our business and honestly destroy our, our businesses too. We had to deal with taxes, the increase of taxes, and also the recession. Right now, the sales are being like really dead. So on top of the street vendors, we had to deal with all this. It's really hard for us. I know that you guys ask us to wait until the holidays are over to do something about it, until Mark comes into the picture. But honestly, I don't know how much longer we can hold. I know at least 2 of our friends that are on this group, they're ready to close the doors. They're really ready to throw the towel. I don't know how much longer we can hold. We're here to ask again for your help. I don't know what else to say. These people don't contribute to the city. And that's the other thing I want to say. We're losing employees because I've been asking and doing some research. These people will do like a day, $500 on the street. And if you think about it, one employee that works 8 hours, even if you pay $20 per hour, they make $160. On top of that, they have to pay taxes and everything else. What will you do, $500 or less than $160? Now, for the city, for all of us, we prefer the people that will make $160 because they contribute to the city and everything else. Those people at the street, even if they make $500,000, we don't get any of that. So, it's something to think about it. And I'm here just to ask you if there's any progress on, when we talk. I want to thank you for those people, we meet before. I really appreciate, but we need to do more quick. Because again, some of the people are getting out of business now.
Okay. Thank you. Our next speaker is Carlos Archuleta.
Do I need to press this button? Awesome. I want to start off, I think because Mark brought up senseless gun violence, I think here in Hayward, I would feel guilty if I didn't bring up Angel Santos and the loss of her son, JJ, who she's every day still trying to get justice for her son. And I hope that we can somehow, someday, bring an end to that and get justice for her son. But I wanted to come down today and talk to you guys as new media about an important topic, blacklisting. Blacklisting is one of the worst forms of intimidation because it eats at the foundation of free speech and democracy. Blacklisting ultimately silences political discourse and the flow of new ideas, but more importantly, it's the blueprints that preserves the status quo of corruption. Some politicians in this room have a pattern of retaliation on organizations, coalitions, political leaders, residents, businesses, and even candidates that have held them accountable in the past. So I come down today to ask, who will be the champion of free speech? In a free and democratic society, we all can't be in a cult universally agreeing. We have to be able to disagree passionately and still be able to work together without the fear of retaliation and blacklisting. And also in a just society, We have to be able to call balls and strikes when it comes to corruption without, too, the fear of being blacklisted. I know in the next election cycle, many of you will either want to continue in your elected seat or move on to other offices. So I ask, will you be able to brag about being a champion for free speech? Or will you knowingly turn a blind eye for the next 2 years of a consistent pattern in your backyard? I have 2 of the more popular platforms in the area where I both hold politicians accountable and I highlight a lot of the great things that they do. And I'd like to offer that platform to you guys. But I don't want to have to worry about being blacklisted because I call balls and strikes on corruption. That's what new media does. I thank you all for listening to me, and I hope to see you all become champions of free speech.
Thank you. I'd like to call next Raul Martinez.
How you doing, everyone? I am the owner of one little business, and we are here to ask for help. And I be shopping. I see more people like before do what we try to say. They affect us because we try to work the way we have to go, but sometimes you see it. People they try to, I don't say benefit for them, but they have to support families too. But us, we be doing this for years, and the way we see it right now, we almost to fall down. And we really need help from you guys to do something for us. Like sometimes you see the sales, they go left, 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 left. You waiting up to Christmas pass. You say probably January go be, but hey, I see the same. And I be shopping to bring groceries to my business, and I see more people doing like, hey, you know, the easy way. Like Jorge say, that's be better work for you, put more money in your pocket, like work for somebody else. Like we work for us, and we had to pay people to work for us. Some people's, they go apply to you, and when you say how much you go pay to them, they don't leave you the phone number. They, oh, you know, I just come to ask like for gold, but hey, oh, thank you, I'm coming back later. And you feel like a big pain, especially when you see it before. We're staying, the COVID affect us every war, the whole war, but hey, like we are a small business, that's hard for us. We want to know, like help us. That's it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then our next speaker is Jose, is it Huitron?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Maybe my English is not very good, but I'm come to Hayward to work. I have business for over 20 years. Right now, that's very hard for us to keep in the business because the street vendors hurt us very hard because I can sell my tacos $2.50, $2.75, $3, and those guys $2. Why? Because they don't pay rent, they don't pay taxes, they don't pay anything. I had to pay taxes, I had to pay employees, I had to pay rent, I had to pay electricity, I had to pay a lot of things. I had to pay a lot of things for City of Hayward too. I don't know, maybe you know that. I mean, I know have nothing about hurt to those people because I know there's a human people and they need to work too. But they don't pay rent, they don't pay taxes, they don't pay anything. And I had to pay everything. And for me, that's hard. You know, Latino people, for myself, my daughter, she just finished college last December. She finished. I'm very happy about her because Not a lot of people do that. You know, maybe you understand me, maybe not. But for me, that's very hard. And I think maybe you can help us to support business, a small business, Latino business. I mean, big companies, they don't care because they make a lot of money. One way, another way, they make a lot of money. But small business, that's hard, very hard. I work myself maybe 120 hours a week, sometimes more. And sometimes I not pay myself. Why? Because I don't have money to pay myself. I have to pay my employees. And I'm very happy to pay my employees because I say, okay, they work for me, I have to pay them. Sometimes for me, $1, $2, $5, I say, it's okay. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next month. But the big point, that's the street vendors. Like I said before, I sell my tacos $3 and they sell the tacos $1.50. Where you go? $1.50 or $3? Everybody go to $1.50, right? I'm just thinking maybe you can help in us because for me that's very hard. Maybe I'm just thinking to close, maybe 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And what can I do? Close down and go away. Or maybe go to the street and start selling food and maybe I can make more money. But like that, the Hayward, they don't make money because I don't pay taxes, I don't pay this, I don't pay rent, I don't pay taxes, I don't pay nothing. And maybe Hayward, they can hear too. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for my English.
It's okay.
Gracias.
Gracias por todo. So let me just, a real brief comment on this. I appreciate it. I know all of you have been calling in. Now we're in person. I know staff has met with the group. We have not received the report yet. I did receive a brief report, but we haven't been thoroughly briefed on this yet. But know this, your issue is on our radar. We are working on it. Staff is working on it. Our city attorney's office is working on it. We are trying to come up with a solution. Something that I really appreciate you bringing forward to the conversation is you absolutely are acknowledging the plight and struggle of the street vendor while simultaneously raising issues that are central to your brick and mortar taquerias. So I just want to say thank you for that and acknowledging those two aspects of this issue. You've always acknowledged that and you've always been working under that context. So we will be reaching out to you, and you all know how to get a hold of us. And so as much pause I have to say, please be patient. I'm gonna just be patient just a little bit more.
It's nothing personal, you know?
No, I know.
Those people, nothing personal.
Yeah.
The only thing that's for the
Yep.
business.
Absolutely.
I mean, they come with the permit, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
But they have to fine for the permit.
Yeah.
There's nothing personal.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And we understand that. We understand that.
we're human beings, and we come to USA to growing up everybody.
Yep.
But that's nothing personal to them.
Absolutely.
To those people.
Absolutely.
Only to have the permit, and that's it.
Absolutely.
Pay taxes and pay everything else what we pay. That's it.
Absolutely. So I have to close public comment. I appreciate you guys coming out tonight. And
My apologies, Mayor Salinas. We have another speaker, but it's via Zoom.
oh, we do have another speaker. Okay.
Yeah. The initials SHNA. Please go ahead and unmute.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I just wanted to say welcome to all the new council members. My name is Gabriel Altamirano with the South Hayward Now, South Hayward Ahora. I just wanted to echo the sentiments of the restaurant owners that came out to speak about the unpermitted street food vendors or unpermitted mobile food facilities. And our group is not in any way against, South Hayward now is not in any way adverse to permitted street food vendors, but rather are very concerned regarding unpermitted street food vendors, unpermitted mobile food facilities, which affect the livelihood of the retail businesses in our neighborhood. We rely on these retail businesses, including the restaurants. And it's really important that our community advocates to with the city to create a means to protect the retail businesses, and also a means to provide information regarding the recent state bills that allow individuals to now obtain mobile food facility permits with only an ID, a California issued ID, which now everybody can receive. Previously, prior to the bills, you needed to provide a social security number to apply for a permit, but that is no longer the case. So I think one of the means of solving this issue is getting the education, the word out to folks who want to have mobile food facilities to that they no longer need to have social security numbers, but rather just an ID. And the process for getting a mobile food facility permit through the county's environmental department is it's not that extensive. It's not really, it's costly, but nothing major. But it provides for a safety net for the community in terms of health and safety for food preparation and the food that's being sold. Also, one other thing I wanted to speak on, I only have 50 seconds left. The homes that were red tagged over on Faircliff over the last week, we just wanted to really encourage the city to be able to have resources available during holiday weekends, especially during the storm periods. Now that, and especially now with climate change, these storms are getting worse and worse. And those folks up there have lost their homes, but did not have access to city resources because of the holiday weekend. And it would be wise to have those resources available on those weekends, have the critical resources available on call, especially if there's a storm anticipated and there's flooding and homes are washed out and in red tags. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any more?
Yes, we have one more. A. Martinez.
Okay. A. Martinez, you can key up.
Yes, hello, hi, good evening. Hello?
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Hayward City Council. So I'm here on behalf of the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES. And just very briefly, I would like to talk about the importance of the earthquake early warning system we have here in California and the importance of it is to Hayward residents downloading the MyChic app. With the ever-present danger of earthquakes, California has developed the nation's first statewide earthquake warning system through the MyChic app and ground motion sensors that can detect earthquakes. The app was actually developed by the UC Berkeley Seismology Lab and gives users crucial seconds of warning that could save lives before the earthquake strikes. And this provides them with enough seconds to drop, cover, and hold on, especially during the past couple of earthquakes that happened in the last part of 2022, like the 6.4 earthquake that happened in Humboldt County, and then the 5.1 that happened back in San Jose back in October. So the MyChic app is free to download on iPhones and Androids. The earthquake.ca.gov, it's also available in Spanish, and I would be happy to answer further questions about the app or the California Earthquake Warning System, or I'd love to connect with you with Cal OES as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was very timely. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Okay. So I'd like to close public comment and go to city manager's comments. Madam City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good to see everyone this evening. I actually don't have any comments this evening, but I did want to highlight that city staff have been present on site with the homes at Faircliff pretty much round the clock, assisting, providing cleanup and restoration crews, also helping them work to file claims. So we did have a lot of resources out there for the individuals whose homes were impacted. And, obviously a very scary situation for everyone. Only one house has been red tagged. Only one family was displaced. They are now, we did offer them hotel vouchers, and we understand they have found another place to live. And so we will continue to work with the neighborhood. We have an emergency contractor on site who is already shoring up the hillside. And so there are other questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to my office at 510-583-4300.
Mayor, I have a question
Councilmember Cermeño.
or a request more than anything. Kelly, is it possible for you to give maybe a couple of specific words for these restaurant owners as to what the city is planning?
So we did have a meeting, and I attended that meeting in December with actually many of the speakers that were with you this evening. And we provided shortly before the holidays sort of an update on a number of questions that came up on that during that community meeting. There will be a follow-up meeting on February 2nd where staff will be talking to some of the actual street vendors themselves to hear what their experiences have been, and as we develop this new street vendor ordinance. Again, the challenge is we have to have a street vendor ordinance before we can start regulating the time, place, and manner in which these vendors can operate. And unfortunately, we have done some additional research. There was a question that was asked whether the city staff can right now enforce for lack of health department permit, and we cannot, but we are working closely with county health department staff to come out and do some enforcement efforts, particularly for those vendors that are not permitted. The goal, and we mentioned this to everyone at the meeting in December, it does take time. We have to do the community outreach. The staff has to draft the ordinance. We have to go to planning commission. It has to come to city council, and there's environmental review in that process. So we are hoping to bring all of this back to the council before the August recess, which is an accelerated timeframe for adoption. But that's the timeline we're on, given how long it takes to actually get a new ordinance through the approval process. So I apologize. I know everyone is being impacted. We're moving as quickly as we can. We'll continue to follow up. If there are specific vendor locations that are problematic, we can share those with county health department staff and see if they are permitted. But we as the city cannot shut down a vendor because they do not have a health permit, at least not yet. And that may be something we contemplate in the new ordinance.
Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you. And I'd like to move on to our action items and to our consent calendar. And first ask is there, Councilmember Syrup.
I'd like to pull consent item 5.
Okay, pull consent item number 5. And then we have, anybody else? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move the items 1 through 4 and 6 through 9.
Moved by Councilmember Andrews. Seconded by Councilmember Marquez. And Madam City Clerk, we can do roll call.
Yes, Mayor Salinas, and I believe we don't have any speakers on the consent calendar items. I don't see anyone wishing to speak.
That's
so
right.
I just wanted to
open up for public comment. There's nobody that want to make a public comment. There's no one online?
No.
No one online. So close public comment, and then Madam City Manager, you can call the roll.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Andrews?
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein?
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez?
Aye.
Councilmember Roach?
Aye.
Councilmember Syrup?
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño?
Hey.
Mayor Salinas?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then now to item number 5, Councilmember Syrup.
So I just have a few questions regarding the item. It's my first time pulling an item from consent, so I don't know what typically precludes pulling an item. Is there a short presentation?
No, you
sometimes?
can't do it. You can't. No, I'm kidding. I was joking.
Well, in just reviewing it, for the folks in the audience, we're adopting a resolution approving the plans and specifications and calling for bids for the Safe Routes to School project, particularly around Cesar Chavez Middle School. My questions for staff. Does Cesar Chavez Middle School have the bike racks to accommodate the increase in biking traffic currently? And do we have staff on hand to answer these questions?
Councilmember Syrup, the school has indicated that they have adequate bike racks, and when we implement, these changes, I do not foresee an immediate increase in the number of kids that are biking to school. But again, the school has indicated that they do have adequate bike racks.
Thank you. Are the curb extensions that are outlined in the visual you provided, are they paved or do they offer any physical protections from cars, or are they merely a painted outline extension?
These are painted outline extensions.
Great, thank you. And then my last question, are there any plans to relocate the bike lanes closer to the curb so they're protected from traffic? Because currently they are to the side of the road traffic on Tennyson, which can be quite busy and quite dangerous for bikers.
We will be happy to look into that and see if that is a safety action that we can take. We can definitely look into it.
I see. And so, just to ensure that it's not a simple consideration, but maybe built into the design, do you have an estimate of how much that might affect a project cost if you were to adjust the bike lanes closer to the curb?
We'll have to look into it. I don't think that there is going to be a huge cost impact. We will look into it to see if it is, acceptable from a traffic standpoint that we do that, and we'll look into it and implement it.
Got it. Thank you. And then, is it appropriate for me to make comment here too? Sure. Okay. Well, if we're going to take the effort to use staff time and resources to make this area next to a school safer for pedestrians and for bikers, I just think I would like to ask council to consider amending the plan to prioritize a protected bike lane so that we're building something that gets used and people feel safe using. Otherwise, my suggestion would be sending it back to council infrastructure to make design revisions, but my goal here isn't to delay staff, simply to prioritize a slightly better design. So I would put that forward, and I don't know if that requires a motion or if what the director's indicated is enough.
Yeah. Councilmember Syrup, if I may comment, we would be happy to look into the suggestions that you have made. And if we come up with a solution before the contract is awarded, we can implement that through an addendum to the call for bids that we have made. If that decision is made during construction, after the award, that can be implemented through a change order to the contract.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
And so would this require motion in this case?
I don't think it requires a motion. I think staff has heard your comments, and they will prioritize it. And I think so. I don't think a formal motion would be necessary.
Okay.
I think we do need a motion to approve the item.
We need a motion to approve the item, of course, but not his recommendation. Yes, absolutely. Councilmember Andrews.
Yes, I was actually going to pull this item for a different reason, so I'm happy that we're discussing. But I noticed we're on Tennyson, and it looks like what's the other cross street here? Whitman. Okay, so wanted to know if we're doing any improvements near Dickens since we've had issues further down. Is there?
Yes. Definitely, we are looking into that. We have enhanced the crosswalk. We are looking into installing a rapid flashing beacon to make it safer and make pedestrian more visible to drivers.
Do we have an estimate timeline of when the flashing beacons?
It's going to be soon. It's just a matter of, supply chain. I hate to give you that answer.
It's okay.
But a lot of things are now depends on availability. I can tell you that the 3 rapid flashing beacons that was part of the design for Patrick Avenue have been installed now, and they are operational. So it took a couple of months or so to get those.
Okay.
And we are working on beacons, and that's a priority for us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Roach.
I forgot it's not a button; it's a physical button on the dais. Thank you. I had questions about this item as well, so thank you, Councilmember Syrup. But I also realized a lot of this was already baked in and vetted by the stakeholders that were involved in this project, and that it is just going out to bid at this point. So I was willing to see where that went. But I did have a question about the beacons. Are you talking about the crosswalks on Whitman in front of the school? Because I drove through there today on the way to this meeting, and there's a lot of kids, walking back and forth, bicycles, and I can see how easily something like that could happen. So where are you saying the beacons are going to be?
So that would be Tennyson and Dickens.
Okay, and are there any plan, like the street level ones for the crosswalks that go directly across the school on Whitman?
We will take a look and see if a beacon is warranted there. But right now, there is no plans to install one there.
Okay, yeah, just because, the rush hour, even today, rush hour traffic took me through, Google Maps took me through Whitman, and I realized as I was going through there, watching the kids come out of school and going across that, the people have different motivations on their mind to get through there. So I would appreciate you looking at those crosswalks as well for beacons. Thank you.
Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Murray, for answering our questions. I just wanted to verify, based off the staff report, it says that construction would proceed in April and be completed in June. Just want to verify that the school's okay with that. I'm just trying to figure out if that's the best time, trying to minimize impact for that area.
The construction is going to not be very disruptive. It's not going to include a lot of curb and gutter work, but we are going to be cognizant of that. I was actually thinking about the same thing, that maybe we can schedule this so that it is not at the time that the school is in session, if it is going to be disruptive.
Yeah, if we could revisit that, I think it would be a lot better for that neighborhood. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the comment.
So for the first time, Councilmember Syrup, you launched an entire discussion, so congratulations on that. So since you pulled it, would you like to move it?
I'll move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Syrup and seconded by Councilmember Goldstein.
And I believe we have a public comment.
And we have, that's exactly what I was trying to say.
Zoom.
So yeah, public comment. Do we have a public comment?
Yes.
It's online?
Yes,
Yeah.
via Zoom. Initials SHNA.
Oh yeah, I know that, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. So I reading the staff report, and I live in the general area. I don't recall there ever being any, and if there were, I missed it, but any kind of community discussion or workshops regarding this, the traffic, which is a major issue for our neighborhood during the rush hours, peak hours. It takes at times 35, 40 minutes to get into your neighborhood or out of your neighborhood. And I'm not certain if there was any community discussion, because we could have brought a lot of good input. Something that we would push is the school returning. There used to be for 50 years a egress or access gate at the very southwestern part of the field. And kids used to walk out in Huey along Tennyson Road, which which that part of the road along the field is not utilized at all whatsoever. So when that gate was closed, all the traffic that used to QE freely and easily without congestion along Tennyson moved over to the front of the school on Whitman. And we would have recommended and suggested the city look into working with the school district to consider reopening and building a pathway and maybe an automated gate to be able to ease that congestion, because the congestion is extremely dangerous. We've seen kids regularly get hit by cars because of the congestion. It's not reported, but that would really solve a major issue with the concern of kids being put in danger because of the congestion. The kids, a lot of the kids cross at the crosswalks, but many of the kids, cross outside of the crosswalks. That's where you have the issue. So, if the city could, I don't, you guys are ready to approve this resolution now, but if the city can come back and look at that to help ease the congestion along Whitman in front of the school and bring that queuing over back like it used to be to Tennyson, you have like an eighth of a mile section that is free for picking up and dropping off students. It's a very logical, I think, solution that will be a win-win for everybody. So if, the city can take that up or maybe even consider, I don't know how far you guys are. It looks like you guys are ready to move this forward, but consider that in the future. Keep that in mind. That would be great. And can you please explain whether or not there was community involvement with this item? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other public comments? No? Okay, and before we vote, we have Councilmember Andrews.
Yes, in the staff report, there's a section called public contact. If the caller wants to review that, but if they want to go into detail, looks like in the report there was a survey as well as a community meeting, and there was also an assessment that was made. So I don't know if Director Mary wants to speak a little bit more to the community contact that was made, and if there's any follow-up we can do.
Yes, we worked with ACTC, as you mentioned, Alameda County Transportation Commission, and also the school, and received feedback and comments from the school. This is a mini grant that we have received from ACTC, combine it with some city funds to implement these safety improvements. I will be happy to look into the suggestion that the caller made regarding further improvements at higher cost later on to this part of town. I'd be happy to look into it.
Thank you.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so like to close public comments, return, and Councilmember Andrews asked and answered a question, moved by Councilmember Syrup, seconded by Councilmember Goldstein. Madam City Clerk, if you can call the roll.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Andrews.
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez.
Aye.
Councilmember Roach.
Aye.
Councilmember Syrup.
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Yes.
Mayor Salinas.
Yes,
Thank you.
and item passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Syrup. Okay, next item is a work session. Work session is on item number 10, Hayward Residential Design Study, parking analysis for Hayward Residential Design Study, report from Acting Development Services Director Bowser. And so I'd like to see if we can have, is she online? Oh, okay. Director Bowser, go ahead and kick this off.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Mayor and members of the council. Here tonight to have our staff present to you a work session item on parking study associated with the Hayward Residential Design Study. I will be quickly turning this over to our wonderful staff on the planning division that has been working on this, but I just wanted to set the stage a little bit for you. This is a study that we have embarked on, have been working on for a little over a year, and will continue to work on. But we had received some feedback in an earlier work session that we held with council last year. Really related to some parking. And so we went and did a little bit of a parking analysis and wanted to present those findings to you in relationship to the development of the objective standards, which is now called our Hayward Residential Design Study. And with that, I really do want to turn it over to our senior planner, Elizabeth Blanton, and assistant planner, Taylor Richard, who are going to present the item to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bowser, and good evening, Mayor and members of the Council. Elizabeth Blanton, Senior Planner. I'm here, as Director Bowser said, with Assistant Planner Taylor Richard to present the analysis and recommendations of a parking analysis that was conducted as part of the Hayward Residential Design Study. Just to reiterate, tonight's session is just a work session, so we won't be asking you to take any specific action, but rather to provide feedback on the recommendations that are contained within the analysis. As a reminder, in 2020, the city was awarded an SB2 grant from HCD to complete various housing-related projects. And of the awarded funds, $235,000 was earmarked to accomplish two main tasks. First, to correct inconsistencies between the Hayward General Plan and some of the city's single-family or RS zoned properties. And two, to provide the city with the opportunity to develop more detailed objective zoning standards for residential development. As Taylor will speak about more in a moment, there are several recent pieces of state legislation that limit a jurisdiction's ability to deny a housing project if it meets all objective standards. So as a result, our main goal with this project is to ensure that the city has adopted objective residential zoning standards that will result in attractive and accessible housing that's aligned with our community's vision and priorities. So here we can see we're currently in the middle of this project. Last year, we focused on kicking off the project, conducting some background research, and then leading an extensive community outreach process. Now we're in the middle here, working with our consultant team, which is led by Mintier Harnish, to develop some technical reports and analyses to help determine which objective residential standards are best suited for our community in Hayward. And then one component of this technical work is the parking analysis that we'll be discussing tonight. So following tonight's work session, we'll come back to you with a few more times with some options for design-related objective standards, with draft zoning amendments, and then for final adoption, hopefully later this summer. But tonight, we are going to be focusing on residential parking. So before we dive in, let me quickly remind the council about the feedback that we've received to date on this issue. At the project's kickoff meeting last February, which was a joint session of the Planning Commission and City Council, staff was provided with the following direction on how the project should specifically address parking. So we got a lot of feedback. This is just the parking feedback we received. First, we heard that it's important for the project to take into account the community's concerns about residential parking. Second, we were directed to evaluate the city's current parking regulations for any areas of improvement. And then third, both the commission and the council showed a lot of interest in encouraging strategies that reduce the need for parking in the first place. So things like shuttles, better bike infrastructure, car sharing programs, unbundling parking costs from housing costs. These were all things that came up at that first meeting. Last summer, the project team also conducted a number of public outreach events to get our communities, our larger communities, input on what makes for good housing development. And this included launching an online visual preference survey. We hosted an online mapping tool that allowed people to actually pinpoint locations around the city and tell us what they did or didn't like about existing residential development. We led a series of 5 neighborhood walk shops or walking workshops where community members had discussions about what they did or did not like in their various neighborhoods. And then we hosted tables at a number of community outreach events to collect people's housing preferences through some interactive sticky dot voting. And we saw, I think, almost all of you at those events, so I know you're aware of that. Last fall, the council was provided with an informational report and outreach summary that gave a very thorough analysis of all the comments we've heard to date through the project's outreach efforts. But again, since our focus this evening is on parking, I'll highlight the key takeaways we heard on this topic from the community. First, there was a lot of concern about spillover parking into the neighborhoods, especially surrounding higher density developments downtown and along the Mission Boulevard corridor. Second, there was also an interest from the community in unbundling parking. They didn't use those words exactly, but disassociating the parking costs and the housing costs. Third, we heard that developments that include individual garages should also have driveways that are long enough to park vehicles. We've seen some developments in recent years that have like real short driveways, and they wanted to make sure that driveways were available for parking. And then fourth, again, we also heard the desire for things like protected bike lanes, shuttles, and other alternatives to driving, make it easier to get around the city without driving. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague Taylor to walk through the first components of the parking analysis, which were prepared by the project's transportation consultants, DKS Associates.
Good evening, City Council. I will be providing a brief overview of 3 key state housing laws, Density Bonus Law, SB 330, and AB 2097. For the purposes of this work session, I'm going to focus on how these laws impact parking regulations for residential development specifically. Following that, I'll provide an overview of our current parking regulations. The first key state housing law we will be covering is State Density Bonus Law, which provides developers with tools to encourage the development of affordable and senior housing. Under this law, jurisdictions cannot require more parking than the parking ratios outlined within the table. There are further reductions for projects that meet certain affordability levels, serve specific populations, and are within a distance of transit. Furthermore, the law requires cities to provide 1 or more concessions to qualifying projects. Concessions are reductions in standards that result in an identifiable and actual cost reduction. For example, developers can request a concession to reduce their off-street parking requirements further. The next law we'll be covering is SB 330, also known as the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. The purpose of this law is to address the housing crisis by removing barriers to residential development and expediting permitting processes. Specifically, SB 330 prohibits local jurisdictions from adopting objective development standards, such as minimum off-street parking regulations, that would reduce the intensity of residential use that is currently allowed by the general plan and zoning. The final law we will be covering is AB 2097, which the governor signed into law last September. This law eliminates minimum parking requirements for residential, commercial, and other developments within a half mile of a major transit stop. The state law defines a major transit stop as an existing rail or rapid bus station, a ferry terminal served by bus or rail, or the intersection of 2 or more bus routes with 15-minute headways during peak commute times. Within the city of Hayward, there are 3 qualifying major transit stops: Hayward BART Station, South Hayward BART Station, and the Hayward Amtrak Station, as indicated on the map by red and orange circles. There are 2 bus routes, Route 99 and Route 10, that are close to qualifying as a major transit stop with headways of 20 minutes and 17 minutes respectively. These routes are shown in red and orange lines and generally run along Mission Boulevard. AC Transit, which provides bus service within the city of Hayward, is currently undergoing a network redesign, which may increase service within the city, therefore limiting the city's ability further to enforce parking minimums in additional areas. This concludes the overview of state housing law. Overall, the state legislature is focused on streamlining and incentivizing housing development to address the state's housing crisis. One of their methods of doing so so far has been by reducing parking regulations. Moving along to our regulations, the city has parking regulations outlined in Chapter 10, Article 2 of the Hayward Municipal Code, within our Mission Boulevard Code, and within our downtown specific plan. The applicable regulations are dependent on the proposed use and the location of the development. Generally, for new single-family dwellings, a minimum of 2 covered parking spaces are required. However, if there are no street parking on both sides of the street, then 2 additional uncovered parking spaces are required. These 2 additional uncovered parking spaces cannot block the covered parking spaces. Said differently, the driveway spaces in front of a garage do not satisfy this requirement. The following diagram shows this regulation. The cars in blue indicate the required parking. Moving along with our parking regulations for multifamily dwellings. The regulations shown on the screen apply to areas outside of the Mission Boulevard Code area and the Downtown Specific Plan area. The parking regulations for those dwellings will be discussed on the next slide. For a studio unit, 1 covered and 0.5 uncovered parking spaces is required. For a 1-bedroom unit, 1 covered and 0.7 uncovered parking spaces are required. And for a 2 or more bedroom unit, 1 covered and 1.1 uncovered parking spaces are required. The Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual, also known as the ITE Parking Generation Manual, identifies parking rates for a variety of land uses. For the city's parking analysis, the most conservative land use context and weekday parking generation rates were used for comparison. Those rates are shown in the right column of the table. For all unit types, the ITE manual rates are lower than the city's current regulations. As previously noted, the Downtown Specific Plan area and the Mission Boulevard Code area have different parking requirements. Within the Downtown Specific Plan area, a minimum of 1 parking space per dwelling unit is required. And within the Mission Boulevard Code area, there are no parking minimums. The support for this regulation within the Mission Boulevard Code was based on the Hayward Infill Housing Report published by the Council of Infill Builders in 2019. This report recommended the city adopts parking regulations that encourage market-driven supply and noted that lenders will not finance new projects without sufficient on-site parking. Since the adoption of this standard, developers typically have provided 1 parking space per dwelling unit within the Mission Boulevard Code area, and no developers have provided no parking. The city's parking regulations also identify opportunities for developments to reduce their minimum off-street parking requirements. While the majority of these credits apply to non-residential development, there are a couple credits that apply to residential development. There are opportunities for housing for seniors and people with persons with disabilities, developments providing bicycle or motorcycle parking, developments that would like to have tandem parking, and developments that would like to satisfy their parking requirement by providing parking off-site. For each of these opportunities, there are very specific criteria and findings that have to be made. That concludes the overview of the city's current parking regulations. I will send it back to Elizabeth to discuss the parking analysis methods, findings, and recommendations.
Thank you, Taylor. So in conclusion, the parking analysis contains a series of 5 recommendations for how to improve residential parking regulations in Hayward. The recommendations, again, are based on the review of state legislation and the city's current standards that Taylor just walked us through, in addition to the best practices from other jurisdictions and input received from city staff, community members, the Planning Commission, and this body. So the first recommendation in the parking analysis is to maintain the current parking requirements within the Mission Boulevard Code area. So this means, just to be clear, not instituting parking minimums for new residential development in this area, and instead maintaining the current market-driven approach, which, as Taylor mentioned earlier, is typically resulting in approximately 1 parking space per unit. Specifically, the analysis points out that state legislation limits the city's ability to increase parking minimums in any zoning district. And this is because increasing the number of parking spaces required for a zoning district without changing any other standards like height or setbacks or open space would effectively lower the total amount of housing that could be built on that site. So this would be considered down zoning by the state, which is prohibited by SB 330. In addition, AB 2097 could limit the ability of the city to require any parking along Mission Boulevard in the future if the upcoming AC Transit network redesign includes slight increases in frequency to bus service along Mission. So this means even if the city does come up with a way to institute parking minimums along Mission in a manner that's compliant with SB 330, there's still a chance that parking minimums would once again be prohibited within another year or so due to this state legislation. Secondly, the analysis recommends that the city not increase parking requirements for multifamily developments anywhere else in the city either. And in addition to those limitations posed by SB 330, the analysis found that the city's parking rates for multifamily development are already higher than the rates published in the ITE Parking Generation Manual, which again is the industry standard for determining the amount of parking demand that a particular use would generate. Third, based on best practices from other communities and in response to feedback from decision makers and the public, the analysis recommends developing incentives or credits for multifamily developments that incorporate transportation demand management or TDM strategies. So this could include granting developments a reduction in parking or some other form of credit based on certain conditions, such as the site's proximity to transit, if they include active transportation amenities as part of the project, making car share available on site, and or providing subsidized transit passes to residents. Those are just a few examples of what TDM measures might be. I'll quickly note here that the city's Public Works Department also has interest in developing a more robust TDM program for the city, as not only would it align with the city's strategic roadmap, but it would also make us more competitive when we're applying for future grant applications. That said, they would also want me to point out any increase in TDM program requirements will also necessitate the city determining how these programs will be effectively and fairly managed. Fourth, the analysis recommends allowing for the unbundling of parking as part of the code revisions. So basically, this would mean for a multifamily development, the cost of the housing unit and the cost for a parking spot could be separated. So say if someone doesn't need a parking space, they would pay less rent, for example, than someone that needs one or more parking spaces. Developments would still be required to have the same number of parking spaces. There would just be more flexibility in assigning the spaces based on actual need. The analysis' fifth and final recommendation is to allow driveway parking spaces of single-family homes to count towards the total 4 parking spaces required when there's no on-street parking. So this relates to that lovely diagram that Taylor was showing us earlier. Basically, it means if a home is built on a street without street parking, it would still be required to provide extra parking spaces, but driveway spaces would count to fulfill some of that requirement. And with that, I'll open the discussion with a list of 3 questions that staff would like feedback on this evening. First of all, which of the 5 recommendations presented in the parking analysis do you think are right for Hayward? Second, do you support the development of transportation demand management requirements or credits for multifamily development? If so, which TDM strategies should be included? I mentioned some tonight, bike infrastructure, transit passes, scooters, car share, shuttles. These are some of the things that we've heard in the past. Are there any geographic areas of the city, such as downtown, along Mission Boulevard, or around major transit stops where TDM requirements or credits should apply? And then would you be supportive of differentiating TDM requirements or credits based on certain factors, say the size of a project? Maybe it's required for a project with 100 housing units, not for one with 4. The location of the project, as we just said, the level of affordability, the amount of on-site affordable it includes, and or tenure, if it's a rental project versus an ownership project. And then finally, we've talked a lot about like counts of parking tonight and some of those sides of the regulations, but are there any other parking design issues, such as setbacks or visibility of parking from the street, that should also be addressed as part of this project? I'll note here that we have our transportation consultant, Josh from DKS Associates, who's very patiently been waiting on our Zoom call. So if we have any specific questions about the analysis that you want the technical expertise from our transportation consultant on, he is also available to answer questions this evening. And with that, Mayor Salinas, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And this is a work session. So as work sessions go, I open it up for public comment and to see if there's anybody in the council chambers that would like to make any kind of comment regarding parking in the city of Hayward. Is there anybody in the chamber? Don't all run up at the same time. Are there anybody online?
Yes, Mayor, we have one speaker, SHNA,
Oh, okay.
and then Ro Aguilar as well.
Okay. We'll go to the speaker first. So the South Hayward Neighborhood Association.
South Hayward now, South Hayward, Ahoda, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. So I'm coming on late and just started reading this parking study memo. And at quick glance, I don't see that there's any discussion that tackles the huge issue in the city of Hayward of residential units built, before 1979 and after 1979, who have concreted over 75% of their front of their house to utilize as parking, which takes away from the on-street parking usage for community members. It's a huge issue. You can drive everywhere in Hayward and see homes that have concreted over, I think they're required to maintain 25% of their front yard and concreted over 75% of the yard to create 4, 5, 6 parking units, which then therefore they utilize the curves, either the curved curves or the perpendicular curves to get on and off of their front property, which they're now using as a parking space. And this study does not, and it's a huge issue, and I think that it should be looked at and considered and counted, because the city of Hayward is losing massive amounts of parking, on-street parking for community members to individual homeowners who have converted the front of their house into literally garages, parking garages. So that is something that we would request that be looked at, and also the city take a position. I know the position is that you cannot create ingress access over a sidewalk adjacent to a public street without proper permitting through DPW. So this would be a really good time for the city to tackle that issue and let folks know that parking is an issue. The city's on-street parking is valuable, and there is an issue with homeowners converting 75% of their front of their house to utilize for parking, therefore reducing the on-street parking inventory that is an asset to the city of Hayward. So that is something that we would request this memo include and discuss and recommend some action regarding those on-street parking units or parking spaces which are being taken away by folks who are utilizing them for their own personal use. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I apologize if I said your organization wrong. Next caller is Ro Aguilar.
All right. Good evening, council members. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
I want to welcome back the ongoing council members and welcome the new council members to their post, and congratulate the new ones. I'm trying to get, I don't know when I talk about parking, but it's part of the bigger picture of housing, of course. And I have been speaking on housing, being in an emergency state of housing deficiency for owner-occupied, low, very low, and moderate income folks. And parking is tied to the cost of affordable housing. And also a common complaint of the community is, not enough parking, too much traffic, too many cars. So I think this is a very important issue that ties in with affordable housing. I fully support any measures that the staff can come up with to decrease the cost of parking in developments such as, the sites, reducing the need for car ownership. As an example, we need to have a vision of the future that allows our cities to function with fewer cars. And so I think that some of the suggestions made in this report and the study tie into that, reducing the need for cars, reducing the need for everyone to have a car. As much as I don't trust driverless cars, I think if that was a help in taking away my car, I would probably give it a try. So please support these recommendations, the unbundling of parking, allow driving spaces to satisfy the uncovered parking spaces. Let's look to the future of Hayward. We can't limit development because of parking. We must continue to develop, particularly in the affordable housing area, and come up with creative responses to the parking issue. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no more public comments. And so I would like to close public comments and call on Councilmember Roach for comments or questions.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to address the first caller's question about the on-street parking being taken away by people cementing over their grass area for parking. I think it's a really good point. Maybe I'll just ask staff, because in my neighborhood, I see lots of that. And then you either feel bad or you get yelled at by the neighbor because you've parked in front of their makeshift parking spot. And people with like corner lots that have side gates that have created driveways in their backyard and their side gate. That's another one where they'll put out their own notices that you can't park there. So maybe I'll just ask staff, is that something you're also looking into?
Yeah, Taylor and I were talking about this on the side. You probably saw. That's a fantastic suggestion to look into that more. Just for clarity for this group and for anybody listening in the public, the requirement is actually you can't pave over more than 50% of your front yard area in an RS zoning district. Some people definitely have done more and have made makeshift curb cuts, but they're exactly right. The reason we don't want to see that is because it cuts up the curb, it takes away the on-street parking, and to your point, Councilmember Roche, for people that have two driveways, we need to be thoughtful about how that's designed so it's not splitting up the curb and making like these 3/4 length spaces where people can't park. So we both wrote that down as a note. It's not included in the parking analysis, but we can certainly include amendments in that realm in our final recommendations.
Okay, thank you. And then on the Planning Commission, TDMs were a big discussion, and I asked in the past, and I wonder if you have more information. That are there any findings that some of the TDMs, the more passive TDMs like bus passes and more bike lockers, do those actually work to reduce people's ownership of cars? Is there any data on that?
There certainly are studies that show that everything is so context specific. Josh, I hate to put you on the spot, but you are our expert. If you have any specific studies or anything you can point to about TDM, maybe something we can point the council to.
I do not off the top of my head, but that is something that I can look into. And if I find studies on the effectiveness of TDM, I will certainly forward that along. I do want to say that the examples that we provided in the memo are a subset of a very comprehensive TDM document that San Francisco has prepared that I believe is kind of considered the standard for sort of a menu of TDM options. I picked out the ones that were most relevant to Hayward, but if this is something that you want to dig into deeper, I encourage you to read the source document.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the answer I've gotten now for a long time. So I'm just not totally bought into, where it's reducing parking. Maybe it's reducing some trips in that, people might take advantage of some of these to get to BART, but I'm not sure it's reducing the need to have a car, especially in a city like ours that's, suburban, you need your car in some instances. So I think I'd be more supportive of the kind of infrastructure that might get people out of their cars, like protected bike lanes. Like, for example, if we're going to ask developers to build more biking infrastructure, for example, along Mission Boulevard, then there has to be protected bike lanes to get them to where they might want to go. And so I would be more supportive of asking developers to pay into that kind of infrastructure that's going to have a real impact on getting people out of cars. And I did bring up shuttles a lot on the Planning Commission, and I understand that's a very costly thing to look at. But a Mission Boulevard shuttle that works among all of the new developments we're going to see, and maybe if they buy into some sort of district, maybe it becomes more possible with the volume that we're seeing coming along on Mission Boulevard. So the TDMs, I'm interested, but I just don't know that we know yet whether the more passive ones work. I'm all for creating the tandem parking on multifamily housing in front of the driveways. Although I did understand in one of our Planning Commission meetings that if the owners decide to make their garage into an ADU, which they're allowed to do, then the parking, there's no need to add those 2 more spots. Is that right?
That's correct. That's another instance of state law, as Taylor was pointing out, where they see that parking requirements are a real inhibitor of housing development. So that's one of the areas that we just don't have wiggle room around. But that's correct. If somebody converts their garage into an ADU, the 2 parking spaces within the garage or 1 parking space within the garage do not have to replace elsewhere. So perhaps another reason to think about making sure driveways can accommodate, knowing that we have a lot of our community that are building ADUs.
Yeah, absolutely. To make sure those, right, so I'm absolutely for making the driveway parking, but also that we make sure driveways are long enough, longer than, 19 inches or something that actually will take a sort of average SUV. So yeah, definitely for that part of it. As far as unbundling parking, and there was some question about off-site parking, if you had a number of developments along a transit corridor where there are no minimums required, I know sort of creating more parking is not the answer, but have there been any ideas about providing an off-site parking that all the different developments might use as their unbundled parking spot?
Not to my knowledge. I'll defer to Director Bowser if she knows of any conversations that have happened in this realm. We do see that downtown, obviously. We have some municipal lots and parking structures that are kind of built into our downtown area. Along Mission, we haven't seen the same thing. Parking, one of the reasons that the state is disincentivizing or taking away our ability to require parking is because it's incredibly expensive to build. Yeah. So for that reason, land is expensive, parking structures are expensive. I don't think that's something that the city has looked at in serious detail, but I can get back to you with more detail on that the next time we come back to this body.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, what about any statistics on unbundling parking? Does that work?
Again, I'm looking at, I can see his face in our city clerk's screen. I'm looking at our transportation consultant. I don't know if we have specific data off the top of our heads, but again, I'm happy to dig a little deeper, get some studies on this, get some data behind some of these recommendations, and come back to you with that. Unbundling parking in addition to reducing parking need is also an equity issue. Instead of just assuming that everybody needs to pay for a parking spot, it's really trying to match the demand to the need. So if you do not have a car, if you're getting by with an AC transit pass with a bicycle, something like that, you're not effectively paying for someone else's parking spot in development. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mainly the flexibility, both on the part of the development and on the part of the renters, as well as it's not a disincentive, but it removes an incentive to have a car, if that makes sense. Because you're not paying for something you're not using otherwise.
Yeah, I mean that's just sorry, my colleagues, but the equity issue is another issue that I've talked about on the Planning Commission, which is, so my understanding with new state law, if it's 100% affordable housing complex, it can be zero parked, right? Because you get some sort of bonus for that. But we have no minimum requirements. However, you're saying the market basically drives a market rate developer to create at least one spot. And so that, yeah, I mean, that does create a little bit of a livability equity issue, because the market is basically saying it is desirable to have a parking spot for a way, comfortable living. And so I don't know how to balance that, but it is a concern, and I'm sure it's something you're looking at. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Can I just make one quick response to that?
Sure.
In regards to the market pressure? I believe what is, and this is just talking from my experience, the whole idea of market pressure is that parking is extremely expensive to provide. It was just stated earlier. And so developers will, being profit-minded, get away with as little parking as they can if they don't think it's going to be used. I don't think it's necessarily inducing traffic as much as sort of maximizing that cost benefit. And at one space per unit, that's not necessarily assuming that every unit will have one space usage. It might be mixed. Some might have 2 or 3, some might have 0, so on and so forth. And so we look to those trends that developers are providing to sort of support the demand studies that we see in ITE, or to avoid artificially increasing the requirement and therefore reducing development potential. But I wouldn't necessarily say that because they are providing parking, it is what's the word, making parking more attractive or car ownership more attractive. I think it's the other way around. Is the marketers are able to more dynamically respond to those trends than we are.
Okay. Councilmember Goldstein.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Great questions from my colleague, by the way. It's very thoughtful. Tell me a little bit more about the two-wheel parking. So just disclaimer here, I'm a motorcyclist fan, so this resonates with me. But I'm imagining as part of a TDM plan, you would encourage developers to create parking for motorcycles and other two-wheeled vehicles. And wouldn't that just be mostly in the larger developments, or are you thinking maybe smaller infill too? Tell me a little more.
It could be. Again, this is one of the things we're looking for feedback on tonight, and we are also working with our Public Works Department to fine-tune some of these recommendations. But the way that staff, in coordination with our consultant team, has been looking at the TDM strategies so far is to provide, say, a menu of options to developers. So certain solutions, whether it's for two-wheel vehicles or shuttles, which are more expensive, or transit passes, might make more sense for certain developments than for others. So in order to allow flexibility, there might be some sort of point system awarded to them, and you have to make up, say, 50 points for the development, but it's up to you how you make that up. So in terms of whether we would require this for larger developments or developments in some locations versus others, staff at this point, if council agrees with that direction, thinks maintaining some level of flexibility and letting the developers come in and propose something that at least meets, this point total is probably a good approach. But again, one of the questions we're looking for feedback from you all on tonight are which of these strategies in general do you think are going to make the most sense in Hayward? Is that something we should be incentivizing? Are there other strategies we should be incentivizing in addition?
So So first of all, it was a great presentation, and I think you hit on a number of solutions that look very promising, and I would not say no to any of them. And I would also recommend, as regards two-wheel parking, motorcycles, even the large ones like the variety that I prefer, take up half the space, and if done correctly, 1/4 of the space of a typical car. So when parking is at a premium, my motorcycling friends and I often will park 4 motorcycles in 1 car spot. And, just as a courtesy to leave more space available for other people visiting a particular business. And I also noticed, just out of my personal habit, this is just completely anecdotal, but when motorcycle parking is available at a location where I feel that is more secure, so for example, near the entrance to the business or some high visibility location, I'm a lot more likely to want to take my bike. And then as well, if there's coverage from the elements. So I have wet riding gear, but when I get to my destination, I want to take that rainy weather gear off and make myself presentable for whoever I'm visiting. So it's a nice, covered parking would be a feature that would encourage me to want to use it more. And then if it's free or low cost, so I wouldn't want to pay the same parking rate for my motorcycle. And this has actually happened in some cities where they allow motorcycles to park in the same spot that is currently being occupied by a vehicle. But if that vehicle leaves, if they've paid for the parking and then they leave and that meter expires, I could get the full ticket. And so I would simply ask for some consideration about that. Like maybe motorcycles are waived because we're not actually taking the whole space. We're actually making it available for another vehicle. And then if I can move on to a slightly different topic, and that would be the unbundling. I recognize that it's up to the developer to figure out the right balance of parking based on market conditions and so forth. And I thought I heard you say earlier that we don't really have any metrics at this point about how successfully unbundling is working. Okay, so I'll leave that alone. And I totally get it that the benefit is definitely to renters or unit owners who don't have a car. But that then brings us to another topic, which is that last mile trips and parking considerations at BART. So speaking with BART directors as well as community members, they look at these large lots that BART has, and you probably noticed yourself, people drive early morning, they fill up the lot, cars don't move all day long until the end of the day, and then the cars go back home. Well, it is wasted space, it's wasted energy. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons why we should try to work to make that disappear. Well, it's all based on housing and how do we get people from their home down the hill. And, just a thought that occurred to me was BART's currently charging, $3 for $3 or $4, depending on the location, for an all-day parking spot. And wouldn't it be super sweet if rather than spending that money, we're actually rewarding someone to take an Uber? So whether the cost, I haven't done the cost, in my head. I know we don't like giving money away if we don't have to, but just a thought about making it so that there's at least some equity. Meaning if it takes somebody from the top of the hill to get to the BART station, $10 for a ride and another $10 to go home, could we work out some other formula where they're actually incented to take an Uber and leave the car at home? Carpooling, I don't know, just something along those lines. That last mile trip to BART seems to be a stumbling block, and I think we ought to look at that. But great job on the presentation, very, very thoughtful. Thank you.
Elizabeth, I have a couple responses if...
Sure, go ahead.
Jump in, Josh.
No problem. Okay, first I want to talk about the motorcycle piece. I want to make sure we separate. There's two aspects to that. There's the CDM portion and then there's the space portion. Generally, motorcycles are not involved in TDM measures, and I think that's primarily because it's not considered to reduce any VMT, or there's no distinguishing between car VMT and motorcycle VMT because of emissions, versus things that promote bicycle or walking or transit. And I just went back and checked the San Francisco one, and there's zero mention of motorcycles. However, that's just one aspect of what we're talking about. The other aspect is space. And then to your point, it definitely is a valid point that motorcycles take up significantly less space. And so from that perspective, and, you know, I'll leave it up to the city about any motorcycle requirements, but I think providing it as a provision for trade-off or offset, providing motorcycle spaces could definitely be an aspect moving forward. Regarding the access to transit and Uber, I would actually recommend against that, primarily because when you're talking about someone driving to BART and then returning to BART, that is essentially a round trip that occurs once a day. When you think about, there's two aspects. Number one, when you think about someone calling an Uber, the Uber has to drive to that person's house, then they drive to the BART station, drop them off, and then they drive somewhere else, and that thing is repeated at the end of the day. So you're actually creating more VMT through that solution, number one. And number two, as you said, people get to the BART station really early and it fills up. There's a reason the freeways fill up significantly during commute hour, and that's the volume of trips when we all want to go somewhere or we all want to go home. And so I would doubt that any Uber, Lyft combined TNC fleet would be able to handle the potential demand created by any subsidy program to do that. So between that and just actually potential for increasing VMT, I would recommend against something like that. Now, on the demand portion, there were studies done, and I believe BART actually did a program of incrementally increasing the parking cost at multiple Bay Area stations, and they found that they were upping the cost, and it wasn't having any effect on demand. And I think that's because in the Bay Area, the cost of driving, both for toll, parking, and time, is so large that it would require a significant, if any, cap on BART parking before you'd actually see a cost versus reduction in demand. You see the same thing with the express lanes, the toll lanes. There was an accidental 10x spike in fee one day, and it didn't affect demand at all. Anyone who was willing to pay to use the express lane and get there faster was willing to pay 10 times the cost. And so for these sort of extremely constrained, high congestion, high delay facilities like we see in the Bay Area, cost just isn't an issue. And so we don't see the same thing that we might in a less constrained environment.
I'll just quickly piggyback on that and say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Goldstein, I think part of it is not just, or part of your point was not just that, you know, BART parking lots are full, and yes, to Josh's point, a lot of that are for people coming from farther away. I think the objective, if I'm getting it right, that you were getting at is more of, there are people that are going to be living in these developments along Mission Boulevard that are like 3/4 of a mile away from BART. They're not coming from long distances. How can we get them to the BART station in like a quick, reliable way where they're not one of the people that's parking their car down the street? So yes, I do think Josh raises a lot of good points. I also think that incorporating or prioritizing some sort of last mile type trips or thinking about things we can do to get people that last mile to BART is a reasonable thing for us to think about with TDM. Maybe it's more like scooters and bikes and things like that, but I think that's something we could definitely can consider.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But of course, Councilmember Goldstein would never get a ticket on his motorcycle in Hayward because parking is still free in Hayward.
And that's why I stay in Hayward.
Councilmember George Syrup.
Thank you, Mayor. Great questions from my colleagues. I just wanted to echo what Councilmember Roach said about figuring out creative ways to funnel dollars into biking infrastructure, shuttle infrastructure. I know these are harder collective problems to solve, but I think the payoff is huge. I want to also echo what public commenter Ro Aguilar said about this being connected to housing. I'm going to get on my renter's soapbox for just a second. According to our draft housing element, which I encourage all of our members of the public to read, page 31 has household characteristics. 20% of the rental units in our city are 3 bedrooms or more, where 79% of ownership housing stock is 3 bedrooms or more. And so as housing prices go up and we see a significant amount of overcrowding, we also see a significant demand for parking in these communities. And so I just want to make a very quick comment. I don't know where it fits in specifically with this report, that the cost of housing and the cost of rent also drives up a lot of parking congestion. And so finding a way to cool that down also addresses a lot of these off-street parking issues. I want to express my support for the recommendations that are made in this report. Thank you, staff, for compiling it and giving a very thoughtful and succinct report to council. And then I think my last comment is just on the topic of unbundled parking. I have questions about the execution of it, although I think there's a way for it to actually be integrated with TDM. So if unbundled parking on its own is implemented, I worry that the property owner can just pocket the savings and charge an additional premium to renters for that additional parking. So how do we avoid that? Instead, I might suggest, as part of the TDM package, the renter is guaranteed that parking spot of 1 unit, but they can opt to release it for, let's say, a bus pass or a bicycle credit or an e-bike credit. And so the TDM is really in the hands of the tenant and not at the discretion of the property owner. I think that would be a more equitable approach. And I think those are all my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. That was good. Councilmember Andrews.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. Wanted to also echo City Councilmember Roche on the shuttle. When we were on Planning Commission, we always ask, what can we do to get a shuttle in Hayward? I'm sure senior planner or planning manager LaCurico is probably rolling his eyes right now. But what do we need to do to reach critical mass to get a shuttle like Emeryville, Manhattan Beach? I can go on, but there's a lot of cities that have the shuttle near residential developments to get to the major locations in their cities.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, quite literally. I will say many of the planners attended a planning conference in Anaheim earlier this year, and they had a darling little kind of mini shuttle system called the Fran, if anyone's been down there. I'm forgetting what it stands for. It's great, look it up. Thank you, Taylor, she's our boss. Free rides around the neighborhood. I asked that specific question because we went to that conference after we had all of this from the Planning Commission. So I'm like, great, how did you guys figure this out? They had a lot of grant funding that was time constrained. So they figured out how to pay for it for the first couple of years. And then after that, it's something that they have to figure out how to do the ongoing funding. It was very popular there. So I don't know if that's something that we as a city, kind of outside of the scope of this project, pursue grant funding to get something like that started. It seems like something that would be tied to some of this new development coming in, but not the sole responsibility of the new development. So it's a great question. We are fully on board with thinking that something that would be fantastic. It's just the dollars.
Where was the grant from?
That's a good question. I don't recall off the top of my head. I'm looking at Taylor, who has a better memory than I do. Okay, I do. We can reach out to the city and see if there's anything we can specifically learn from them. But from what I've seen in other cities, I don't know, like, for example, how Emeryville funds the Emery Go Round. I want to say it's connected to some of the businesses pay into it. Mm-hmm. But that's something we could look at in the city of Hayward. Obviously, that's a little bit bigger than the scope of this project, but it's something that is on definitely planning staff's mind and the public works department as well. So that's a frustrating answer.
We have a thriving industrial sector.
We do.
I'm wondering if we could look to them to help with some of this. But I definitely want to.
Councilmember Andrews, can I jump in for a second? Because we did actually do a shuttle study a number of years ago, and really worked closely with our industrial businesses to see what would be the feasibility, what would be the ridership. And it just really didn't make a lot of sense, and the city would have to subsidize it pretty heavily. And we did get a grant to study that. So, I mean, I think it's something we can continue to discuss with the businesses, but I just wanted to let the council know we have looked at that in the past.
Okay, yeah. If we can look at where they received that grant to subsidize that, it doesn't look like a very large shuttle, but if it's tiny. So if we can get something, the Stackmobile, whatever you want to call it, like if we can figure that out, that would be super helpful with relieving some of the congestion going back and forth to BART, the multiple BART stations, get people shopping downtown, get them to the industrial area, shoreline. I mean, just the key Hayward locations, it would really help with some of those trips. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was I always appreciate Ms. Aguilar calling in about affordable housing. Definitely would love to see some incentives connected to that. I was also thinking of outside the box thinking in terms of providing more incentives that could reduce some trips. And I normally bring this up during economic development, and when we have developments with retail on the first floor and then they sit empty, we don't know what's going to come there or if anything. So instead of necessarily retail at the bottom in areas that doesn't have a lot of foot traffic, can we provide parking incentives that are connected to uses that can reduce trips? So if they put in a coffee shop, if they make sure they put in at least a coffee shop, because a lot of people, they go to Starbucks and go right back home. I know we do that. Also, printing facilities, meeting rooms, something where it can be a working space on the first floor where people who work from home can actually use some facilities that doesn't require them necessarily to go out. If that's something that can be done, if it's tied to an amenity that reduces car trips. That's in the, because that's, the state is driving us to be New York City, but New York City has amenities everywhere, and we don't have that infrastructure here. And we need to incentivize the developers to help us get the amenities in order for them to make these requests in parking. So I just wanted to see if that's a possibility.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. It's not something we've looked at yet, but it's certainly something we can look at moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Sarb said he loved it. And then, yes, I agree with the driveways to accommodate, especially with the ADUs. I know ADUs kind of have a bad rep, but they do relieve a lot of multi-generational housing issues that we have in existing housing. So I do think we need to figure out a way to accommodate the parking if we're going to continue that practice. And I think that was all my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. I first want to just really commend staff, the entire team on this, and all the outreach. We've seen you for well over a year, and I love voting with dots because you get to vote more than once. Not that I'm against voting more than once, but not that I support it, but it's just fun. It's a fun way to engage people in the process. So thank you for being out and visible and interacting with so many folks. So I really... I'm in support of everything. I don't have any concerns. I understand why we have to do this. We're trying to tackle the housing crisis. Hayward has definitely done their fair share of that heavy lifting. So I'm in support of it. Just a couple questions I do have with respect to the Mission Boulevard and all the development we've done in Sohay project and the former Caltrans properties. I think this was mentioned earlier, but I would like to see if we could identify land or a partnership. I know it's a little bit difficult, but there is a closed elementary school in that area. There's Moreau Catholic has a large parking lot. I'm just wondering if there's any type of partnerships. Even some of the dealerships have a lot of open space in the back. So I'm just wondering if we could identify some space where there can be off-site parking. Also very interested in figuring out the last mile issue that Councilmember Goldstein raised. I live very close to South Hayward BART. I'm not someone who's comfortable getting on a bike. If I had more time, I could walk there. But when you're trying to make all these commitments, that makes it a little bit more challenging. So definitely echo the comments made about improving our bike plan, which I know we're working on. But I would be curious to hear staff's ideas on how we could get to that last mile. The mayor just showed me a picture of the Fran. That looks very interesting. I would love to see us put energy in testing that pilot, talking to our businesses that we know are doing very well off of Huntwood, as well as the industrial corridor, to see how we could possibly implement a shuttle. In terms of the TDM, I also had some of the same concerns that were mentioned earlier. How successful are they? So would be interested in more information around that. Also agree with Councilmember Syrup, just making sure with the unbundling that there is oversight and that saving isn't being kept by the property owner, and just ensuring that people that want to live in our community have options. Since we do have the BART stations and Amtrak, I think it's just a matter of the outreach and flexibility. And I don't want to say anything negative about AC Transit or BART. I know they've been struggling through the pandemic, but just want to make sure that we continue to have that relationship with them and talk to them candidly on how can we work on increasing ridership. Because right now, a lot of the concerns I hear is people just don't feel safe using public transportation, the cleanliness. I know they're doing everything possible to mitigate those issues, but continuing to have that dialogue. I know on the leaflet, they were amazing in adding information about BART. I always encourage, we got to remind our community members of the two BART stations, of the Amtrak. I do think, unfortunately, people forget about these options. So I think we need to continue to promote that. And let's see. I did have a question. I know this was brought up a long time ago when I was on the Planning Commission. I don't think I've seen this implemented in any of our projects. But what's staff's knowledge? I know there's these lifts that some of the multifamily units develop just to... You can stack up 2 to 3 cars. Do we have any of those in the city of Hayward? Or
I don't know that we've had any, and I again will defer to Director Bowser if she knows of any. I don't know that we've had any come in recently, but that is something that we would allow, that we do allow for developments. There's some language in the industrial section of our code that talks about alternative parking plans. So if like uses change in the future, there would be ways to add additional parking, including lifts. We've had some interest. I can say I've been with the city for about 4.5 years now. We've had some interest from developers, especially downtown, wanting to like squeeze in parking spaces to a smaller area and use lifts. I don't know that we've actually seen that built recently, at least. But again, I defer to Director Bowser if you have any knowledge of specific projects.
Yeah, so Councilmember Marquez, there's one that I am familiar with, and it's actually the new apartment project by Legacy on Mission. In their garage, they have provided a stacking system, but they were to provide additional spaces beyond the total number of required spaces for that development. And that was based on sort of market demand and what they thought they might need in order to rent those units. And that is one project that I am aware of that is a relatively new project on Mission that has incorporated that as a creative solution. But it is, as Senior Planner Blanton mentioned, there's not a lot of them, but that is certainly something that we could look at as we're updating the regulations to see what sort of additional flexibility, if that is something that the council is interested in. But that's one at least I know of.
Okay, thank you. And as was mentioned before, I really like the approach of menu of options. I do would prefer that we tailor it to close proximity to public transportation, really encouraging the TDM options for people to have a bus pass, discount on BART, whatever we could do to incentivize people to possibly not own as many vehicles and utilize public transportation. And I'm also interested about the car sharing programs, not necessarily being able to rent a vehicle for a couple hours or a day, but also I'm not familiar with the company, but I know I've seen somewhere if I wanted to rent my car out, there's a mechanism to do that. So also looking as for that being an additional option for people to consider. But overall, I really appreciate all the great work. I know we're not at the final stage of this, but I think we're off to a good start. And just want to strongly, strongly emphasize that we're doing our best to conform with state laws, but at the end of the day, our public is still very, very upset about the spillover. So we have to be mindful of that when we're making these decisions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And, a lot of the ideas up here, I agree. I don't think you're going to find a lot of disagreement. And I just wanted to comment on what Council Member Syrup talked about, how parking is often tied to housing, and absolutely. But like what Council Member Andrews has very eloquently observed is that parking is also tied to economic development. And I say that because when I was in Anaheim, I took a ride on Fran, and Fran took us from one area of downtown, one area of exciting downtown, to another area of exciting downtown. If we had Fran in Hayward right now in our downtown, Fran would be looking for an exciting place to go in our downtown. We have some exciting places to go in downtown, but clearly not at the volume as as some of these larger or some of these other downtowns with all of these amenities and places to go. And so I say that because as we really begin to think about and plan more retail in downtown, these kinds of programs, they work. I mean, when I was in downtown Anaheim, there was the wait time was at least 15 to 20 minutes for, Fran to come by. But it did come by, and it was frequent, and it was on time, so the program worked. And it also reduced, things like, there was a lot of party goers out there, and so they weren't driving, they were walking, there was a shuttle program or, this Fran program. There's a lot of benefits to it, not just, parking or, some of these other things. But anyways, I just want to, I agree generally on a lot of this, on everything everyone said. I kind of did want to just, I don't know, for a lack of a better expression, double down on the, TDMs. I know that there are some attached to Lincoln Landing, but as Lincoln Landing begins to open up slowly, maybe we'll see maybe we'll get data from that, right? I know we attached a lot of different programs, bike, shuttle, and I forget, there was maybe one or two more to the Maple and Main project. But that's still in some transition right now. But I don't think we have a project yet that is fully grown with all of the TDMs on that we have planned for it to be there. So, I still like to see people, get out of their cars, rely more on transit. I know AC Transit and BART, they're certainly thinking about this. To some extent, I like to double down on TDMs because, I'd like to see them work. In the ideal world, it would be great, If we had a flourishing TDM strategy program in its full robustness, that would mean we have great housing, options. That means we would have great economic development, an active economic development environment in downtown. So anyways, those are my comments, and
I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
very good report, most excellent, well done. My one question is, are there any thoughts on limiting the number of cars per housing? Per house. I have neighbors who have 8 cars. I have a couple neighbors across the street who has 6 cars. Is that does that have a play in this particular scenario?
Unfortunately,
Is that a no-no?
I don't think so. We as a city can control our zoning regulations, so we can regulate how many parking spaces are allotted to a housing unit. But when it comes to ownership of cars, we can regulate where people park them. You know, some of these suggestions that came up earlier about making sure the entire front yard is not paved over and people aren't just parking 8 cars, you know, in their front yard. We can control some of that. But in terms of ownership itself, we as a city wouldn't have control over saying somebody is only allowed to own, say, 2 cars.
Right. It's becoming very difficult for our city staff and our code enforcement folks to actually go to homes that have cars parking on their front yard, and then also abandoned cars. So somewhere along the line, we're going to have to coordinate with our police department and with our code enforcement folks to actually be able to approach some of these homeowners and say, you can't do this. You have to get off the front lawn, and then actually help our police department get rid of some of these abandoned cars, because that would mean more street parking available for the rest of us. A shuttle idea would be tremendous. I always dream of a shuttle from Chabot, Southland, downtown, and Cal State. And please start looking for grants. I think that'd be tremendous. That's something that would help us out. It certainly would be a need. Chabot has 15,000 students. Cal State has about the same. Can you imagine all those folks dropping by at Southland and then over at downtown? I like all of the recommendations. That, as was noted before, we would need to be careful with the unbundling, checks and balances. I like the idea that it's a way to incentivize not owning a car. That's excellent. That's well done. TDMs, they've all been listed, from tandem to lift parking to resident amenities. So that's very good. So your 5 recommendations are excellent. Keep working on them, and we will discuss this some more when we return in a couple of months, is my guess. So thanks again. Well done. Good job.
Okay. Looks like there are no other speakers. So I would, so do you have what you need from us?
We do. We really appreciate everyone's comments. We got a lot of good feedback and new suggestions tonight that we'll look into. Just so everybody's clear on next steps, next time we come to you probably will be in a month or 2 with kind of all the other objective standards that are more design related. We'll look at some high level options and recommendations for those, somewhat similar to what we did tonight. And then the next time we'll bring back any sort of specific direction on parking will be when we actually have draft zoning regulations closer to this summer. So thank you, this was very helpful. We'll look into a number of these ideas and we'll hopefully come back to you with data in addition to some fine-tuned suggestions.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to close item number 10 and move on to council reports and announcements. Councilmember Andrews.
I failing the location again, but I have to announce there is a key paper. Arroyo Park. Thank you. Depot Road. Thank you so much. So we do have a Keep Hayward Clean and Green event this Saturday at Arroyo Park, and please, it starts at 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. So, and it's at Rancho Arroyo Park, 2121 Depot Road. And please come out. We will have bags, we will have grabbers, we will have gloves. We may or may not have donuts. I'm not quite sure on that yet, but we will definitely have some snacks for you, and we hope to see you out there to make Hayward clean and green.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? Council, maybe I should turn this on. A Councilmember Goldstein, and then I'll go.
Yeah, thank you. And after we're done with the cleanup at Rancho Arroyo, at 1 o'clock, from 1 to 3, right here in the rotunda, the NAACP will be having their swearing-in ceremony, and it would be wonderful to show some heart and show up for that. I'll be there.
Excellent. Thank you. And anybody else? Councilmember Zermeño, anything else over there?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Marquez.
I promise I've been pressing the button. I'm having technical issues. I'm trying to follow the rules here tonight, people. So just I want to congratulate my new colleagues. This is fun. We're here. We miss you, Councilmember Zermeño, but glad you're joining us. But just congratulate everyone, and just wanted to share with the public that this past Saturday, I had the opportunity to go on a ride-along. I'm very proud to report that I lasted 10 out of the 12 hours. I could have went the full length, but I don't think the officer wanted me to watch him write reports, so I decided to stop at the 10th hour. But I had the pleasure of riding with Joey Fiandor, and he's been with the force, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but close to 7 or 8 years. Has a brother on the force. They're both raised in Hayward, so it was really, really interesting to spend so much time with someone who clearly is dedicated to their job, committed, and has a lot of good ideas and suggestions. And I saw a lot of activity that night, and I got to see our drones be deployed appropriately. There was a call-in at one point for canine support from Alameda Sheriffs, a lot of cooperation with other agencies, and just wanted to thank them for the opportunity to allow me to shadow, and just want to encourage us to continue to do more and more local recruitment. I do feel like it makes a big difference when people have connections to our community. And aside from that, we have many officers that are doing great work, but that does make it a little extra special when it's someone homegrown. So just wanted to thank them for that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. If there are no other reports, I will move on to council referrals, and there are no council referrals. So now we're to adjournment. There are two people I'd like to acknowledge. You know, we began the beginning of the meeting with rather somber news. And, you know, we are concluding our meeting with, you know, somber news, but I think it's more of, I like to conclude, of an acknowledgement of two wonderful people and celebrate their life who have given so much to this city. The first person I would like to acknowledge and remember is a very, very long time friend of Hayward and an employee of Hayward, Everett Veal. He began working for the city of Hayward in the Hayward Police Department on September 16th, 1958, where his monthly salary was $405 a month. Imagine that in 1958. And so he had a very long career in the Hayward Police Department. He retired in 1989, 60 years of service, 60 years. After he retired, he then went and he did continue to do some work in the Hayward Police Department, and I believe in the property room. But the other thing is that in 2007, he started working for the Hayward Fire Department. And I don't know if you ever had seen him around City Hall, but he was this just a joyous, happy, very friendly guy who would deliver the mail internally with the fire departments. And just a wonderful guy, always said hello. I remember when I was first elected, and I didn't know like everyone in City Hall yet, but I would always run into him in the elevator. He would always park his car next to the elevator, and he always pull his mail bin out, and he was always going out. Anyways, just a very, very nice guy. And and I know the police department and the firefighters right now are all mourning him. and but it was just a wonderful guy. So I'm sure we will be notifying and arranging with his family to have a tree planted somewhere. We'll have to figure out whether it's close to the police department or close to the firehouse. We'll have to determine that. But may he rest in peace. The second person I'd like to close or adjourn our meeting is somebody who I would consider a very, very close friend. Many of us knew her, Dr. Doris Yates from Cal State East Bay. She was a professor up at Cal State. Her office was right around the corner from my office, and for many years, several years, I would walk out of the elevator. Her door was always open, and she was always listening to jazz. And you always knew she was in her office because you would hear Coltrane or Davis, Miles Davis, echoing through the hallway. She just an outstanding professor, just a wonderful person. She, you would see her in there talking to students, and just, she was highly beloved by students and her colleagues on campus. Of course, she wasn't only a professor. She was incredibly engaged in Hayward. She was a commissioner. I believe she was a community services commissioner. She had done a lot of work, particularly around youth. Her work not only was on the commissions, but she was also heavily engaged in the community with youth. She had also done some really outstanding work over at the South Hayward Youth and Family Services Center, where her and Professor Ituarte, who was also coincidentally a professor of criminal justice there at Cal State, her and Dr. Yates wrote a grant, and it was funded to start a tattoo removal program for youth who were making sort of the transition from gangs, and they were resetting their lives. And part of that first step was, they wanted to remove some of their tattoos, most noticeable tattoos. And so Dr. Yates she had done that for many years, and and of course she was a mainstay in every downtown event, activity, festival, and it is so sad to see her go. And just on a personal note, we mayors, we sign a lot of certificates, and we sign paperwork and ordinances. This afternoon was the first document that I signed in memorial to something or to somebody. And it is absolutely incredible that the first one I signed today is for Dr. Yates. So she was certainly a good friend. God bless you, Dr. Yates. Meeting's adjourned.